We're sharing these two mics, so we need to be friendly. So what we're going to dive into this afternoon is, from an ethics perspective, what do we need to think about when engaging with consumer brands? But a little bit, I've bigged you up a bit, but if you can big yourselves up a bit more, who are you? Who do you work for? What do you do? And why do you think you've been invited here today?
Good question. Hi, everyone. I'm James Poulter. Everyone knows me as JP. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Vixen Labs. We've been a conversational AI agency for about the past 6 years or so not just because ChatGPT exists. And we sold that business just before Christmas to House 337, which is one of the UK's leading creative companies, and I look after AI there now.
Hello, I'm Perla. Yesterday I moved to Expedia, so Senior Global Comms Planning Manager. Right, did I get that right? Last week I did the same thing at EA Entertainment, so not anything as impressive as this in terms of AI, but I do plan for and brief content where we do use AI, and I'm very much responsible for making that go well and do it right.
Hi everyone, I'm Nina. I'm the Public Policy Officer at IAB Europe. We are a Brussels-based organization representing the digital advertising industry. And yeah, I basically do everything AI policy related. My main focus is EU level, of course. So I'm going to be talking about the AI Act a lot. Please prepare. But I also have my eye a little bit on the international stage.
Hello everyone, I'm Dimitris. I'm IAB Europe's Data Analyst and Sustainability Manager. That means I usually work on sustainability for most of my time, but lately I've also been working on IAB Europe's new AI working group. Funnily enough, I work with Nina both on sustainability and AI. And I'm mostly here to provide insights on industry-level views and perspectives on the structural shift being caused by AI.
Awesome, and I'm cognizant that not all of you are in here all day. My name's Charlie Cadbury. I'm the CEO of a company called Say It Now. We work with top-tier brands to manage their voice assistant, their kind of branded voice experience, how they talk to people within major assistants like Alexa. So I'd like to kind of slow down and kind of dig a bit into kind of where your headspace is at. So what are the things right now within this emergent world that most concern you when you start to engage with a new client? JP, let's go down.
Yeah. I'd start with, I think that we are 18 now, nearly 2 years into this kind of AI moment that I think we're all living through, is I'm still shocked actually by how few people, particularly at kind of senior levels, have actually engaged with using AI on a regular basis. I mean, just by a quick show of hands, how many of you have played with ChatGPT in the room? How many of you played with it in the past month? How many of you in the past week? Okay, good. Right, so this is, but how, and now the same question, how many of you know that your C-suite executives in your companies are doing the same thing? There you go. So this is the problem, is that we've got people setting AI strategy, basically putting AI on a pedestal and thinking that that's going to solve the problem, and they're the exact same people that aren't using it, which I think is a real challenge for us in the industry. And people are asking that they want people to upskill in AI, they want AI skills, they want kind of this skills gap to be closed, but I'm not sure that many people who are asking that question actually really know what skills they're talking about and what they actually want that to look like on a practical level. So I think we're coming out of this kind of moment of awakening around, hey, there is an opportunity here. But in terms of actually those that would set governance, we'll talk about policy and all of those other spaces, they're actually not that educated about it themselves. They've heard of it, for sure. Everyone has. You don't have to kind of go further than opening the front page of the newspaper to hear about it. But to actually understand it beyond the level that they've seen on YouTube, TikTok, or read kind of a headline in a briefing from some consultant that they paid a lot of money for it, they don't really know. And that, I think, is the challenge. We need people to actually really dig deeper, much more deeper into these issues that we'll discuss today, particularly around ethics, and actually understand what the ramifications are going to be, not just for the workforce, because yes, there will be changes to jobs, as we've heard earlier on. I think Henry did a great job of expounding on that, but more what changes are going to happen to the jobs that will still be here in 24 months' time. That's the challenge that they need to get their heads around. So that's probably what I'm most worried about.
Same. And I feel like we're going to talk about this later too when it comes to language, because I think that's very much why that's happening. For me, I mean, it was mentioned a little bit in the last session, but it's the inequalities that are going to be perpetuated because of the data that we already have. It's a huge problem. There was a report that showed that there's a real lack of representation of black people and black culture in these systems, which is a huge problem. And it's something that even OpenAI have kind of taken note of, and they're really looking at the representation in DALE and other programs. Kind of not good enough. We need to, if now's a time more than anything where we need to be looking at the data that's inputting these systems, looking at the quality, looking as companies and as brands at all of our first party data. And then my responsibility and all of everybody that's making content for brands, your responsibility is to make sure you're using that in a way that represents everybody, or we're going to be in real trouble because we're really automizing problems that we already have. So yeah, kind of petrified, but that's why we're all here today.
Have my own mic.
There you go.
Yeah, for me, I think it's two aspects that concern me the most. Also from policy standpoint, disinformation and also bias and what kind of data we're using. And on disinformation, it has been such a big topic during the run-up to the European elections, and a lot of people were concerned about the use of AI in spreading and creating disinformation. Luckily, we didn't actually have a lot of that by using AI, particularly generative AI, but I think it's going to be a massive problem in the years to come because the technology is just going to become more sophisticated and deepfakes and everything. So that is one concern, and just bias that leads to discrimination, as you already kind of said. That's a really big problem, and I think we need to look at voluntary commitments as well on the international stage. So the G7 summit in Hiroshima, for example, has had this result of coming up with voluntary commitments. So we already have some kind of guidelines. We just have to be diligent about actually implementing them.
Well, it's an intriguing question because we have a lot of concerns coming from our members in the AI working group. I'd say two that are additive to the discussion are intellectual property, especially from the publisher perspective, and with the new generative capabilities, which really are the catalyst for the AI hype, right? So like machine learning has been around for some time. Statistics has been around for even longer than that. It's been through two successful rebrands. It was data analytics first, and now it's AI. But a lot of these capabilities have been around. What's additive and marginally different is the generative component, and I think intellectual property is really important when it comes to the ethical conversation on that. And of course, data privacy, which is always going to be a conversation, I think, in advertising, and now with new capabilities based on AI, even larger intersection between data privacy and targeting and different other functions replaced by AI tools or executed by AI tools.
And kind of back to you, Nina, like when you're thinking about kind of legislation here, how do you think about categorizing AI? We were talking a little bit earlier about the challenge of nomenclature. We are sat on the kind of the AI and emerging tech stage, and there's an argument that says that AI is just a new word for emerging tech. We haven't managed to properly label yet. You're kind of setting legislation for AI as a whole, and it's a very nebulous term. How do you think about landing that, and how's your approach then to kind of legislation and putting some guardrails around there?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky question because I think from a policy standpoint, it's quite clear that it's good to have this one big umbrella term, if you will, because we need to know what we're regulating. And if we don't have a definition for something, we can't regulate it. And you can't really have a definition for every single AI system or tool that is out there. So having a really good definition, and also in the case of AI, a broad definition, is really, really helpful to just set the scope of the regulation. So every stakeholder knows, okay, these are the requirements that I have to fulfill. Also, we need to know that which AI systems are tackled by this regulation, and we want to catch as many as possible so we can mitigate all the risks that come with AI. So yeah, I think it's really, really useful to have this definition, and it was a big thing during the AI Act negotiations because it's so hard to define what actually is AI. But looking at the international stage, a lot of countries have very similar definitions, and the EU itself adopted basically the OECD definition. So yeah, I think policy, it's quite clear, but using AI in your companies and everything, I think it's probably a good thing to know, okay, we have to kind of label them differently or talk about language.
And I mean, I put into kind of all of you, like, you can give some examples to kind of existing kind of bias and remedies that you think are being solved.
So how many of you have seen the new Dove campaign that's doing the rounds at the moment with the Gen AI kind of images? Anyone work for Dove or for whoever it was that made that in the room? Good. Okay, we're safe. Okay, so you live with friends. But so, I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's a follow-on from the Real Beauty campaign, which basically shows what AI images look like if you just say create a beautiful woman, which are basically all quite generic, kind of cisgendered examples of what that looks like. And then it says, and do the same thing now from a Real Beauty example, and you get a much more diverse picture of what beauty looks like. Really good example of highlighting this kind of problem of bias. The challenge we have is that as creatives, none of us have got particularly, I think, good understanding of what images, what content, what are these corpuses made up of. How is the content that is currently feeding back to us in this kind of doom spiral that we described within ChatGPT or DALL-E or any of these other models? How did it actually get there? And that lack of transparency is one of the biggest problems, because we can create a lot of goodwill behind making these corpuses less biased and make the internet less biased. But actually, if you ask anyone, how do you go about doing that? It's very, very difficult to answer, because we don't have any transparency from the companies where that data has been pulled from in the first place, with some exceptions on Hugging Face and platforms like Meta, who have kind of published some more open source content around this. So one of the big problems we've got to do is at the kind of macro end, which is trying to get the companies to be much more clarifying around where are they collecting this data and how are they sharing it, and good strides being done by people like Adobe on that when it comes to Firefly. The other problem, though, is we have a kind of you and me level, a kind of individual consumer level, which is that we're not doing anything at the moment to educate individual consumers about how you are feeding these machines as well. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the legislative kind of side of it, because and companies, exactly. So when I say you and me, it's you, yes, as an individual user of TikTok. Do you know how much of your content is going into a corpus somewhere that's feeding a model? And then secondarily, if you're a company using any of these platforms, do you know how much of your content is going in to feed these models? If you cannot answer that question, and if you're a large budget holder in this room, lobby your sales managers, account directors, and account planners at your media agencies, at Meta, and all of these other places to tell you that answer, right? Because otherwise, how do you know? And I think that's the biggest problem. We don't know. And much like in the kind of the 80s, we had a lot of work to make sure that seatbelts got put into cars, and people lobbied Ford and changed the laws, and the Highways Agency got involved. We also had the government doing public information campaigns telling you to put your seatbelt on, because that's how you don't end up going through the windshield of a car. And we've got no one doing that bit, right? And you're going to be doing that at Expedia, and your colleagues should be doing it at EA, and it's the thing that we're at House lobbying all of our brands to think about, big brands that you would know and love, is, guys, do you know where this content is going? Because we get very excited about using AI to create more of it, but we're not having enough conversation about, do you actually know what the content you're creating is doing now? I think that's a big challenge.
I completely agree, and I think when, exactly as you were saying, spreading that kind of information, it's us as communication agencies and as brands to spread that, and also to make sure that the data that we put in these systems, because it's first-party data a lot of the time too. For me, one of the biases, I think when we were talking about, and I'm going to say it, I'm sorry, the metaverse, I know, way before. When we were talking about the metaverse and NFTs and all of that, we were talking a lot about the creator economy and giving freedom back to creators. Obviously, we've kind of gone 180 and we're like, right, AI is actually going to mess everything up with creators now, stealing all your work, giving it to everybody else. Yes, it's kind of a bias, because yes, that is true, but there are marketplaces and AI marketplaces that have been created in order to kind of mitigate that. There's something called Redbubble, so all kind of artists can put their work on there, and they actually it's an extra way for them to distribute their creations and also make money from it. So there is that kind of, where there's every kind of doom, there's also a little bit of kind of levity, and hopefully a bit more of an income stream for them too. So that's kind of my main bias there.
Yeah, maybe 3 points here very quickly. First of all, JP, we hear the same exact concerns in the working group from agencies and creatives in particular about how can they adapt to brand's new expectations or guidelines around the use of AI. Second of all, something that I think is quite different with AI now is the extent to which you can interpret how the model works and how the results came to be. So like faults with algorithmic processes overall have existed for decades, whether the use case is digital advertising or settling your insurance premiums or deciding if you get parole. We've had a lot of very bad bias systems in place for so long based on algorithmic thinking. It's a different question if the algorithm is simple and if the algorithm consists of a neural network with 2,000 weights, right? How do you interpret what exactly the impact of each data point is? And also this crosses over into the conversation about intellectual property and data as well. How do you know what data points are activated and how do you, price that in, for example? And then finally, as we see the barriers to entry for AI-based solutions lowered, and that's mostly because of cheaper compute, cloud-based provision, et cetera, I think we will see more conversations about the ethics surrounding AI, because right now we do have some huge platforms with ethical frameworks, for example, or responsible AI frameworks, and these organizations can afford to dedicate their resource to that and build data foundations required for ethical AI. But it's not necessarily true for a boutique tech vendor that's just started up and is building AI-based solutions.
So I want to build on that ethics question, but we're going to have a couple of minutes for some questions at the end, and we'll take questions through the app. So if you've got any questions, then please add them into the app through Slido. But Nina, if you're able to kind of give us a little bit of an insight as to how you kind of build ethical thinking when you're kind of walking toward the kind of legislation of this arena.
Yeah, I think ethics was such a fundamental part of what the AI Act is now, because the AI Act is essentially just a regular product safety regulation if you look at it, but it combines this aspect with the aspect of fundamental rights and what we need to do, how we need to regulate AI in order to safeguard our fundamental rights. And that's how the AI Act is kind of achieving this balance between, okay, we need to regulate, but we can't stifle innovation in this technology. And this is how you also build or try to build public trust in AI. And that's very essential for investors investing in AI as a technology, because we know that if you invest in an AI system and it's going on the EU market, you know that the provider of the system has had to really take in the requirements of the AI Act. You know that there's certain checks and balances in the system, so you're more willing to invest. So ethics is a really, really big component of that, and we see it in all the international organizations, the guidelines. They all focus on ethics, and every country that's going to adopt policy or regulation in AI is going to focus on ethics and risks first, and then innovation probably as a second step.
So we are actually coming to a close. I'd quite like to get, I know it goes past, there's a lot to talk about. I'd quite like to kind of get a view from the group, kind of, what do you think is there to be optimistic about within the paths that we're currently going down?
Am I the only one that's optimistic? For me, yeah, brand communication, so mine's going to be a lot to do with that. I think we've got the opportunity to really solve some proper brand problems with this tech. There's too much tech for tech's sake. I think we really need to think about, break down what is it we actually need for our brands and what do we need our audiences to do for our brands. I think Meta have certainly recognized that with their Llama. You can actually personalize the way, if you're a marketer or a creator, you can personalize the way that you use Gen AI to interact with consumers. So that's really, really positive. And I've already seen some great examples of it. I think it was UEFA and Adidas did a partnership. Essentially, the problem was that young people weren't watching sport live anymore. So that's a proper brand problem, and they use AI to solve it. So they had Del Piero on WhatsApp to kind of message them personally, give them kind of BTS of what was going on in the match, and it was really like a personalized chat towards them and made them want to watch the kind of the football live. So things like that, it doesn't have to be, all doom and gloom and things like that. And I do think that it was back to when we were talking about it before. It was, no tech for tech's sake. Make sure that we're actually solving brand problems, because then that also kind of cheapens the potential of AI. Who wants the mic?
So I think what I am optimistic about is that there are so many like bad UX problems out there that are going to get solved. But the challenge that for many of us have had is that we've got people trying to run at solving an AI problem when they've got like a shit mobile app or their website still doesn't work properly and there's no connection between this, that, and the other data source. Like the big thing though that this AI stuff is going to do is come over the top of all of those different endpoints and all those different modules and actually be able to start connecting things, which just wasn't possible before. And I always say, like, you could probably like get an awful lot of information from me about, take my Amex bill, my Starbucks order, and my Amazon account, and you could probably work out what mortgage I need. Like, it's not difficult. The answer is not a very good interest rate. But you could do that. And but the problem that gets in the way of all those things historically has been accessing that information, putting it all in the same place, and making it interpretable. And we've been talking about big data for the best part of 15 years. I don't know how your big data lake is going, but mine certainly doesn't kind of have an ice cream parlor next door to it and a jet ski. Like, it needs work. And this AI stuff actually might be the thing that comes and helps us surf that data lake and actually get some value out of it. And so that's what I'm optimistic about.
Again, the really boring policy perspective. I'm really excited actually to see how the industry is going to come together and kind of solve the regulation puzzle. Because if you look at the AI Act, it's kind of a shopping list. So it gives you certain points that you have to fulfill if you are developing a system or if you're deploying a system. But if you actually apply real-life cases to these rules, the line becomes very blurry. You don't really know what is actually high risk in this situation now. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see the industry come together, develop some kind of voluntary guidelines or codes of practices, and just show policymakers, okay, this is how we comply with the regulation. And that's actually what policymakers are looking forward to. The lead negotiator on the AI Act said actually AI Act is dependent on standards. So that's what I'm really interested to see.
I'm relatively optimistic because I see a lot of interest from our members on AI. It's one of those topics where industry professionals want to get ahead of the curve. They even want to, be well acquainted on a technical level. So like when your math teacher in grade school told you you'll need linear algebra at some point in the future. This is that point in the future. And certainly want to be ahead of the curve when it comes to anything regulation related or tied to client demands or requirements. They want to make sure they can keep doing business in the way that they're used to and whenever possible optimize that using AI. Second reason I'm very optimistic is because I've been using AI-based tools myself to optimize and automate a lot of tasks, and it's certainly very helpful. And that's why we plan with our work now to also spread the word and facilitate, good, optimal decision-making based on AI tools. So not tech for tech's sake, certainly not. But when you can make something a lot easier for someone, we want to make sure people are aware of that opportunity.
Well, in summary, to bring this all together, I'm very optimistic because we've got such articulate members of our trade body, right? So we've got the IAB, they're kind of talking at government level and getting consensus and applying to kind of, international standards. That's great. We've got ambassadors for brands who are thinking and talking articulately and kind of leading practitioners thinking deeply about this. And not only that, queuing out the door is the people coming to learn about all this so they can apply it every day. And I think, it's a hot topic. There's never enough time to discuss it all. But thank you very much all for sharing your perspectives today. So thank you, JP, to Perla, Nina, and Dimitri. Thank you very much.